Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Mem Tes. In Ksuba says we learn from Fushlan for Yosef Israel ben Chaim Michal and Elazar ben Reuma. Let's not forget that there's still injured people from the Miron tragedy a year and a half ago. Says the Mishnah on daf Mem Tes Amid Aleph. Daf Mem Tes Amid Aleph. Father is not required to support his daughter, not required to feed her. Now, what are we speaking about here? Let's understand something. The Torah says, we had this the other day, that a man is supposed to take care of his wife. In what sense? We said, Pasuk says, She'erak susava onasa lo yigra. And however we learn which one she'er is and which one is ona, one is the person that has to fulfill his conjugal duty and one is feeding her. But either way, the Torah says that you have to feed your wife. That's the Torah. That's not the rabbis. Ksuba is from the rabbis, right? There's some say that it's based in the Torah because Gemara Psulos, but basically it's considered to be a drabanan. But Midrash Torah, a person has to fulfill his conjugal duties. He has to clothe his wife, suso, bonasa, and he has to feed her. Part of the feeding her is feeding her little children up until the age of 6. Up until 6, that's Midrash Torah. You have to feed your kids. That's what's mashed from the Rambam. You have to feed the kids. That's Midrash Torah. Part of the obligation of feeding your wife is taking care of her brood, her kids. But from the age of 6 on, the Torah doesn't require you to feed your kids at all. It's a mitzvah, as we'll see. But at the time, it's a mitzvah. It's a good deed, but it's not obligatory.
The wife dies, and the children are not yet 6 years old. We're supposed to support them?
Yeah, right. So that's a good question. So he says no. He says that Torah, you only have to feed them as the children of the mother. Otherwise, it's just a matter of tzedakah. It's a matter of tzedakah. Technically, you don't. Right? Technically, you don't. Midaraisa. Midarabanan, you should, as we'll see. It's a mitzvah to do it, but you're not obligated to, meaning the court can't force you to do it, as we'll see. So here the Mishnah says, again, we're talking about a girl from the age of 6 till 12. Once they're 12 and a half, they're on their own. You're not obligated to do anything. Tell them go out and get a job. That's what it was like. You have to remember, the life expectancy wasn't that great then. 12 and a half was like today's 40. It's time to move out and get a job. So here we're talking about from the age of 6 until 12 and a half, or even until 12. Even until 12. Let's say till 12. Technically, he has reshus over her until 12 and a half. But the feeding that we're going to talk about is from the age of 6 till 12. Until 6, we can consider that Midrash Torah as part of the obligation to feed the mother.
Even though he's not obligated to feed her, no, he still has rishus.
He still has rishus over it. Correct. He still has he can marry her off and he can sell her and all that. Correct. So Abe Nechayim Zonas Bito. He's not Mechayiv. He's not Chayiv in the to feed his daughter. And we'll talk. What about a son? We're going to talk about all that. And in last one, he's not Chayiv. Does that indicate that it is still a mitzvah? He's not obligated to, but it's still a good deed. We'll see. Famous story of Rav Zari when he was elected to be the head of the president of the yeshiva. So Darsh Rav Zari l'fechacham beKeren b'Yavne. He darshan for them in front of Keren b'Yavne there in the yeshiva. Habanim Yishuv Habanas Izonu. Now again, the rabbis were mitaken that the sons get an inheritance and the daughters are fed. What do you mean the rabbis were mitaken? What did I just say? The rabbis were mitaken? That's Midrash Torah. Midrash Torah. If a man dies, the inheritance goes to a son. We're not talking about the basic inheritance. We're talking about the famous Ksubas Benin Dichrin. What do we talked about this many times? A man wants to give his daughter a nice dowry. $1 million, marry her, buy a nice house, here's $1 million. However, he says, what happens when his wife dies, say she dies in childbirth, whatever she dies, and she has children, right? They have children. And all of a sudden, who inherits a wife when she dies, a woman? The husband. So he's going to take the $1 million now. And he's going to use that to support the children from his next wife. He's going to have, within a few days, he'll have another wife, right? And he's going to get, that money's going to go to them when he dies. When he eventually dies, who's going to get his Yerusha? All his children, right? His children from the first wife, the one who died prior to him, and the other children that he might have several wives. Why should the other children who have nothing to do with this original father-in-law who gave the $1 million, why should they get his money? So the rabbis were metakenin. So he's going to say, why should I give him $1 million? It might wind up with somebody else's kids, not even my own flesh and blood. Why should I give it? I don't mind giving it to my grandchildren. But why should I give it to his children? The son-in-laws, nothing to do with me. So therefore, the rabbis were metaken. We're going to make an adjustment. Yes, minat Torah, a man dies, Yerusha goes to his kids. If a woman dies, Yerusha goes to her husband. But the rabbi is going to add on in the ksuba. He says, listen, with this money that the father-in-law gives, or whatever assets he gives to the marriage, he says, when the son-in-law eventually dies, that portion of the ksuba, that the $1 million that he gave in the dowry, will go to the father-in-law, the grandfather's own children, not to the sons that he has from the other wife. Understand? But his own grandchildren, not from the children that the son-in-law eventually has from other wives. That's what he might even have several wives at the same time, right? He might have several wives from the same time. And when he dies, he wants to make sure that the Yerusha goes to his children, to his grandchildren, not the. So that's called the Ksubas Benichas. So we talk about here about the Banim Yerushu. However, it says in a lashon of Yerusha. It doesn't mean that it's in Yerusha, meaning when, let's say the father-in-law gives $1 million, and let's say his daughter is going to die. His daughter died, she predeceases the husband. So the children don't get the money then. The money still goes to the husband. That's the Yerusha. However, when the husband eventually dies, it'll go to the original father-in-law's own grandchildren. That's about us Yershu. And so get it as a Yerusha, but we're adjusting the Yerusha. We're saying that's going to, the Habanas is, and the daughters will get maintenance. They will be provided for. They'll have food from the Yerusha. That's another Takana Drabanan. Meaning, as we're talking here about, the man's not required to feed his daughters, as we just said. Minat Torah, after the age of 6, he doesn't have to feed his children at all. Not the boys, not the girls. But there's one of the Tanai Ksubas are, there's many Tanaim in the Ksuba. One of the Tanaim is that after the father dies, the daughters will be maintained with food and sustenance and maintenance and clothing until such time as they get married or until they become a Bulgarian. So what's the point here? That the daughters and the sons who get the Subas bin Dichrin and the daughters are provided for, only provided post-mortem after the guy dies. When they're 8 years old, he doesn't have to feed them. But if he drops dead, then his estate has to go feed them. That's the takana that the rabbis made. The rabbi said we made a takana, one takana of the ksubas, and there are many tanam in the ksuba. But the basics that we think of is the husband has to give for the wife $200 if she's a psula, $100 if she's a ba'ula. Fine, that's the basic part that he has to give. And there's sources for that, or at least hints say that in the Torah, Gemara, psulos, we get the 200 and 100 from there. Fine. That's all. That's the basic idea. But there are many other conditions in the ksuba, and two of them are this. One of the ksuba's been indifferent, that the boys from the grandfather's own flesh and blood, who's giving the money, his grandchildren will get their Yerusha. It won't go to the other kids that the son-in-law has, and the daughters will get fed. That's a separate takana. The daughters after death will get fed from the Yerusha. So this is the drush that he said. Rabbi Lozman, as I said, these are two takanas that the rabbis made. Habanim Yerushu, and the daughters will get sustenance. When do they get the Yerusha? Only after the father died. Even though it's a Tanai in the Ksuba, that's not the Yerusha in Torah, but they said in the lashon of Yerusha, when the husband eventually dies, the son-in-law, when he eventually dies, and his Yerusha split up among his children, and if he has boys, it only goes to the boys, but the boys that she has, it'll go to them. Ksubas bin the boys that she has, right, will go to them. Same thing with the daughters, will only get fed after the father dies, which means to say, confirms what we said at the beginning of the Mishnah. A father's not mechayiv to feed his children from the age of 6 until the age of 12. Now we're going to analyze this Mishnah.
This money is set aside. It's not part of his regular.
No, it's not. There's no trust fund. No trust fund. If he used up all the money, yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. You could always. There's always for the people who are criminals or shady people. There's always ways to get around it. But they want to encourage it, and they want to encourage your father-in-law to give money. So they say, look, what happens if there are no sons? What happens if his wife only has daughters? So they'll get fed, but they won't get Yerusha, right? The Yerusha goes to the system different, right? Go to the other ones. There's always ways around it. Nothing is perfect in life, There's always problems.
And the Yerusha could be land too.
Yeah. Whatever it is, it could be. So the Mazonas Bito Hudam. So the Mishnah says Mazonas Bito Hudam Chayv Mazonas Beno Chayv. Mishnah says a man's not required to feed his daughter. Mashma for a son, yes. Mashma Mazonas Beno he is Chayv. As we'll see, that's not. They're both the same from the age of 6 to 12. Bito Nami Chova Hudaleka. For a boy, it would be the age of 13. Right? We'll see. Bito Nami Chova Hudaleka. Even for the daughter, it says he's not mechuyev ha mitzvah ika. So it's mashma from the Mishnah that for the sons, maybe it's a chiyuv. And from the daughters, at least it's a mitzvah. Says the Gemara, money must be Laura Meir, Laura Bira, Laura. Our Mishnah doesn't come out like any of the following 3 Tanoim who discuss this. The Tanya, we learn. Mitzvah lazan azabanos. It's a mitzvah, not an obligation, mitzvah to feed the daughters. It's a good deed to feed the daughters. We're talking again from the age of 6 till 12. Certainly the boys, the Aski B'Torah, they learn Torah. If you're feeding the girls, it's a mitzvah. Certainly it's a mitzvah to feed the boys. That's the opinion of Rav Meir. Rav Yehuda says the other way around. Mitzvah is it's a mitzvah to feed the children, to feed the boys from the age of 6 till 12 till 13 because they're learning Torah. And certainly you should feed the daughters. How are the daughters going to get food? It's easier, in those days it was easier and less of a shame for the boys to go around begging than for the girls. For girls, it's a big shame. Little girls, it's hard for them to get money. So because of the degradation, if it's a mitzvah to feed the boys, certainly to feed the girls. So both Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda say it's a mitzvah to feed the boys and girls, right? Boys to feed boys and girls. Our mission l'chora is mashma that for the girls, you're not mechuyev, but a mitzvah it is, right? For a mitzvah it is. And you're not mechuyev for the girls, but you are mechuyev for the boys. Here it's mashma, you're not mechuyev for either one, and it's a mitzvah for both, from Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan Baruch Omer, it's only a chov to feed them after the father dies. As we said, that's the ksubas of the girls, right? The bonus uzaru benin nokvin. That's called in the cave of the girls. The yav and the chaminoi. It's written in Aramaic. The ksuba. So they will be fed. Right? That's a mitzvah based on that Tanai ksuba. But while the father's alive, you don't feed them at all. Mashma not even a mitzvah. Says the mitzvah, says the Gemara, money masis, and who does that Mishnah go like? Chor doesn't go like any one of them. Rav Meir Homer Bana mitzvah. He says that for the Bana it's a mitzvah. From our Mishnah, what was it mashma? For the boys, it's a chov because it says you're not mechuyev to feed your daughters. Mashma, you are mechuyev to feed your sons. Rav Meir says you're not mechuyev to either one. It's only a mitzvah. Same thing with Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda Homer Bana nami mitzvah. Some take out the nami, but it's the same idea that Rav Yehuda Homer Bana nami mitzvah. He says that even the banim, even the boys, it's only a mitzvah. Rav Yehuda says that it's a mitzvah to feed the girls and kal v'chomer the boys because of feed the boys and kal v'chomer the girls because of degradation. It's embarrassing for them, hard for them to get the food. He says a banim also only considered a mitzvah, not a chov. So both these rabbis say banim is only a mitzvah, not a chov. And our mission is mashma that banim is a chov; it's an obligation. He says while the father's alive, there's not even a mitzvah to feed these kids. So the Chor Mishnah doesn't go like any one of them, which is improbable. So we're going to come out. The Mishnah could go like any one of these 3, and we're going to explain now. It could go like when the Mishnah says that a father's not mechuyev to feed his daughter, the truth is he's not mechuyev to feed the son either. When he's not coming to deduce from our Mishnah, you're not mechuyev to feed your daughter, but you're mechuyev for son. No. The truth is you're not mechuyev to feed your son either. How mitzvah bito, but there is a mitzvah there. Certainly for the bottom. Why? Because they learn Torah. So why did Tani bito? Why did Tani bito? The reason he said bito and not beno, it's the same thing. It's not mechuyev, but it's a mitzvah. Hakamashman da'afilu bito chovu deleke. Even the daughter, it's not a chov. Even the daughter, right? Who is less obligatory, less of a reason to feed her because she doesn't learn Torah. We sort of Meir holds the sons, certainly you should feed them. They're learning Torah. Even the daughters who don't learn Torah, it's chov to it's not a chov, but it is a mitzvah. And that's why he says bito to tell me it's not a chov, but it is a mitzvah. But for the boys, it's also a mitzvah. So it can come out like a Meir. Or I can say it goes like Rabbi Yehuda. What did Rabbi Yehuda say? It's a mitzvah to feed the boys and certainly the girls because of degradation. Rabbi Seima, Rabbi Yehuda, we go over. He's not mechuyev to feed his daughters. If he's not mechuyev, certainly not mechuyev to feed the sons. The sons don't have so much degradation. A mitzvah of no, but it is a mitzvah to feed the sons. They do learn Torah. Certainly, if it's a mitzvah to feed the sons, it's kavachomer to feed the daughters because of degradation. So why did it say only bito? Even though there's more, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's more of a svara to feed the girls. But even the girls, he's telling you, even bito, it's not a chov, it's only a mitzvah. But it's a mitzvah to teach to feed the boys and certainly to feed the girls. So again, a Mishnah can come out like Rav Meir so far, or like Rabbi Yehuda. Or we can say a Mishnah goes like Rabbi Yehuda, who says it's not even a mitzvah apparently at all. No, he's not mechuyev to feed his daughters or the sons. It's not even a mitzvah. But since after the father dies, it is an obligation to feed the daughters. That's why he says enachai. The truth is, it's not even mitzvah. It's not even a mitzvah at all. So our mission can come out like any one of them, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan says it's not even a mitzvah to feed them. However, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda says it is a mitzvah. Okay. Now we come to three things that Rabbi Law said. The first thing that he said, Amar V'Law, he said, Amar Shlakesh Mishum Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Chanina as the Gersa. Rabbi Law said it in the name of Rish Lakish, who said it in the name of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. But Usha Skina, the Sanhedrin went into Golis in many places when they going chased them out of Yerushalayim. One of the places they went to was Usha. And they made various takonas there. But Usha Skinu, she Adam Zonas Bonav Espinosa Chem Time. They made a takona that a man should feed his sons and daughters when they're ktanim, and Rashi says, until they're bar bat mitzvah. Until 12 for a girl, 13 for a boy. Again, repeating that until the age of 6, apparently it's even a doraisa, it's part of the obligation to feed your wife is to feed her brood, to feed her children. From 6 to 12, it's a mitzvah, but it's not an obligation. So he says in Usha, they were metaken that a person should feed his sons and daughters for up until the age of bar mitzvah. Is the halacha like this? Shita Rav Law said, in the name of Rish Lakish, they made a takana. Is the halacha like that you have to feed your children or not? Or else, I said, Tosh must bring a proof. When they would come with a question like this before Rav Yehuda, this Shmendrik doesn't want to feed his children. Right? Amalu said, Yored Yolda, Babnei Masashada. You know what you're like? You're like a snake that has children, and then he throws them on the public dole. You know, like he doesn't want to feed them, puts them on the public. He's not going to feed his kids. That's what a snake does. Are you a snake? You know, he says that's what he would call it. I'm going to say it's like a snake. He has children and he throws them on the mercy of the public. Okay, that's what Rabbi Yehuda would do. Turn over a mortar. This is a common thing that you find that you have in some place in Shas. When you make a public announcement, they would take a big mortar. A big mortar is like a big bowl, right? A gigantic bowl. You have a pestle and a mortar. They would take a big one, turn it over, turn it upside down so that you could stand on the base. You know, use it as a platform, meaning get a duch on a platform and announce. Amalu, he would tell them, Kafule, turn over a mortar for Tzibura in the public area. But let him get up and say, according to Rashi, he should say himself, Urva boy bane, a raven wants his children, wants to take care of his children, and this one doesn't like his children, doesn't want to feed them. So Rashi says that he himself is forced to get up on the mortar and say, a raven wants to, feed his children, and you don't even want to feed, and this man doesn't even want to feed his children. Rashi says another pshat is that a shliach tzibur gets up there. They get somebody from the public, a town crier or the mayor, somebody gets up and says that. In other words, what you're seeing over here is that the halacha is not that Besson can force him to feed his children, but rather we censor him, we embarrass him publicly in order to encourage him to feed his children. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said. He said, look, a snake has children and throws them on the mercy of the public, and that's what you're doing. It came for Rav Chisda, would say, turn over the mortar, either he himself says it or the Krav says it. So interesting that the Ben Yoyada says, an interesting thing, he says that the mortar is when you have many times you talk about you buy something at IKEA, it tells you to take the male side and the female side and how to put them together, right? So he says that the asisa, this mortar, is similar to a female, right? The opening is like a female, symbolic, let's say, of a female. And when you turn it over and stand on it, you're like saying that, if he doesn't want to support his children, his wife should not have bia with him. She should not, right? She shouldn't live with him, conjugate with him, because he doesn't want to feed his children. Like stay away from your wife if you're not going to want to support your children. He says that's a symbolic. Anyway, so the Gemara now says, "Vorba boy bunny." Does a raven really? What you say? A raven feeds his children, and this guy doesn't. Does a raven feed something like civil? If nay or Hashem supports the children of the ravens who are not supported by their parents, right? If nay or they call out the children of the ravens, of those birds. Their parents don't support them; they don't feed them, and Hashem supports them. So you see that ravens are not supported by their parents. It's lo kasha. So Rashi says that when they're young, they're white, and the ravens are dark, as Poe taught us, right? The ravens are dark, and apparently the birds are so dumb that they don't recognize their children, and until later on when they turn black, that the white eventually turns black, and then they feed them. So when they're young, they don't feed them. When they're older, they do feed them. That's how Rashi learns. Tosfos says very precious. There's different species. There's some white and some black. The black ones feed them. The white ones don't. That's what he says. That so he says that it depends, right? The white ones apparently the black when they get black, they feed them. The white ones aren't fed. In any case, so some are fed, some aren't fed, and that's why some ravens do, and therefore we say that ravens feed their children. This man doesn't. You also come to Rava. Now, interesting. Rava, when they would come for Rava with a question, yes, Amrle, he would say, is that what you want? You want your children to fall on the public funds? Yeah, that's what from the tzedakah. That's what you want. You have kids, and you would send your kids to take tzedakah. You don't want to feed them yourself. So you must velom and alum. That's only if he's not wealthy. Aval amid, if a man is wealthy, kafina, we force him in court. Al karche against his will. Kiyadu Rava kafilu of Nasan Barami. He forced Nasan Barami. Ba'apik mine. He took $400 me'azuzi, 400 zuzi with tzedakah. In other words, for tzedakah, Tosfos discussed a little bit, but there are cases when this is very common in Europe that they would put a not like here where you want to pay the $16.50 you do, and if you don't want to, you don't. Nobody cares, and nobody forces you. In Europe, they would come and they would force people to pay to put money into the public funds, into the tzedakah. So that's what Rava would do. If a guy was wealthy, you could force him. If he wasn't wealthy, you try to encourage him. Say you want your kids to get from tzedakah. So here also the Yamshel Shlomo says that Rava was the son-in-law of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda went and he said, turn over the mortar, stand in public and say, this guy doesn't want to feed his kids, right? Like Lema, the ravens feed their kids, and this guy doesn't want to. And Rava says, well, you say it nicely, what's Rava? He's diminishing from what his father says. You have to embarrass them publicly until they do it. Rava would say, well, do you really want your kids to get from tzedakah? Like you said, in a nice way. What's going on here? So Farshim say, he says, Yamshel Shlomo, that Rava's really talking about a wealthy person. Rava's saying that even by a wealthy person, when you can force him, but it's always good to start off saying it nicely. You don't want to force the guy. It's always good when it comes to when you have the ability to force him, but you're better to do it like, would you like to do it willingly? Why don't you do it willingly and like make a pshara, do it willingly and don't compel us to force you to give the money. I like to feel like you can force them for tzedakah, and this is really tzedakah. That's what you're doing when you're feeding your kids from the age of 6 till 12. It's not you have no obligation. It's a mitzvah. What do you mean the mitzvah? Mitzvah tzedakah. It's as we say, charity begins at home, right? That's where it comes from. That was the first thing the Rebbe Law said, that they were mataken in Usha, that children that have to be fed by their parents. The father has to support his children up until the age of bar mitzvah. And even if we don't force them, but you embarrass them, you censor them until they want to give the money. And if they're wealthy, you could even force them. Another thing he said, Rav Law said Amr Shlakish. Here Yomi said it in Amr Shlakish, not in the name of Yehuda. Before we had Amr Law, Amr Shlakish, Misham Rav Yossi, Rav Chanina. Now it's Rav Law, Amr Shlakish. Listen to this. A man gives everything over to his kids right now. all my sons, I'm giving him everything. He's afraid of the government, whatever. Signs everything over to his children right now. Even though he gave them everything, the kids can be compelled to feed their parents. He gave them everything right now. That's it. He has nothing left. Maybe they're coming after him. There are people who have no assets. Everything's in somebody else's name, or they don't own anything. Otherwise, Saba follows after them, right? All kinds of stories go on. So if he gave everything to his kids should support the parents, even though they don't have to, right? Maskul of Zera, Rav Item, Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Gedol Mizam, that's such a big chiddush. We said another chiddush, and a different case. Gedol Mizam, they said even a much stronger case. Almanosa, his own almana, Nizonis Minachasav, can get maintained, can get supported from his assets, right? So an almana we're going to talk about the case. It's not clear yet what do we mean by almana. Who v'ishtam boy? So certainly in this case where a man gave over everything to his kids, certainly him and his wife, if we support a case. What's the case of the almana? Listen very carefully. When a man dies, who gets his Yerusha? His son, right? Sons. If he has no sons, who gets the Yerusha? The daughters. Okay. So here's the case. The Shalch Rabin sent Biggerson a letter. Misha Mace, a man died. He left over an almana and a daughter, right? Who gets his Yerusha? The daughter, right? The almana he has to support, right? He has to support from the ksuba. That's part of the Tanai ksuba that she has to receive support. But who gets the Yerusha? The daughter. Okay. Almanasa nazonas minachasav. Okay, very good. As long as he left over a wife and a daughter, an almana and a daughter, so the almana is entitled to get food to get maintained from his assets that are belong now to the daughter. And this is a bus. Now the daughter gets married. Okay. Still, while she's married, still the almana didn't get remarried yet. She's still entitled to eat chasav. Mesa bas. Let's say the daughter dies now. So who's left? The original almana and her son-in-law. Who inherits the daughter? The son-in-law. Okay. So in that case, Rav Yehuda ben Achosas, Rav Yossi, the nephew of Yosef B'Chanina, Ayari of Emais. There was a story. I had a story like that came across my desk. When they paskin almanasav nezanas minachasav, right? The almana also gets sustenance from the nechasim. Now, what do you mean nechasim? From the original man's assets, which belong now to the son-in-law. Now, the son-in-law is considered like a purchaser, and the halach is that a ksuba can be collected from nechasim shara, but not from a purchaser. Rashi says, "V'nechasim nishtav lokeach." Rabbanan could go and baal ben achseishto. And Rashi says over here also, Rashi before the lines get wide near the bottom. No, we don't say, listen, he's a stranger who's he's not an inheritor. He's not an heir of the father-in-law, right? He's inheriting from his wife. What does the son-in-law have to do with his mother-in-law? You don't for sustenance for a wife, yes, you do, but you can't go after property. Pardon?
May not even be his mother-in-law.
Right, that's right. It may not be as a mother, right? Maybe as a mother, be from a different wife or whatever. Exactly right. The daughter can come from a different wife, right? But it could be right. So the son-in-law has nothing to do with it, and still you say that she's entitled to keep the nechasim, even though she's no. So if you say in a case like that the almana is entitled still to assets because she has no other option, she's entitled to eat from those assets which belong now to the man's daughter's husband. So certainly in this case where a man gave everything to his own children, they should support him. So cases are very, very dissimilar, but it seems obvious that if in that case she's entitled to money, certainly over here him and his wife should be entitled. No, Mao same with the like of the Torah. There's nobody to take care. There's nobody who's going to occupy themselves, who's going to take the trouble to take care of this wife. What happened? The man died, left a wife and a daughter. The daughter went and married some guy. The daughter died, so the whole Yerusha from the father went to this man that the daughter married. Who's going to take care of that almana? So there was no option. So the rabbis made a special takana, and also because, after all, the son-in-law did nothing. He has halacha like a purchaser in nechasim mishubarim, but he didn't do anything to get that money. He just married this girl, and she died. But over here, the father is who gave away his assets to the children. He's around. He can, the father, okay, he gave everything away, so he can start making money again. He can occupy himself and trouble himself to go out and support him and his wife. So there's an option. In other words, a woman alone can't support herself. It was considered to be very difficult for a woman to support herself. So the rabbis made a special takana. Even though normally the ksuba cannot, the Tanai ksuba, the conditions of the ksuba, that she's eating based on the Tanai ksuba. After the husband dies, she's entitled to eat from the assets. Fine, but you take from the assets that are ready, but not nechasim mishubarim, and this is mishubah to this new husband. Still, the rabbis made a special takana because it's not going to hurt anything. But here the parents are alive, so if they gave everything away, too bad. You might think that it's too bad and they shouldn't support him. Kamash one, the halacha and usha was that made a takana that if you gave everything to your children, you should still. That was a nice gesture on your part. You gave it to them while you're alive. Maybe you gave it to them so that there would be fights after they die, but still they should support the parents. All right. So what about the halacha? Again, before when we said before that they made a takana that you have to feed your children up until the bar mitzvah. Is that the halacha or not? Well, the halacha seems to be that if he's not wealthy, you can't force him to feed them, but it's a mitzvah. What about over here? What's the halacha? That the children have to support the parents after the parents gave them all their assets or not? Tashma, Rav Chanina, Rav Yonasan, these two rabbis have a kind of understanding. Also, a man came over, Gochani bent over, Venashkil Rav Yonasan Akari. He kissed Rav Yonasan's foot. Amarle Rav Chanina said to Rav Yonasan, what's this guy coming on kissing your foot? Did you do him some special favor? Amarle, I'll tell you what happened. He had written everything over to his children with immediate effect. And I forced him, I compelled him to feed them. Right? If that's not the halacha, you don't really have to feed them if they gave everything. That's why I had to force him, because I told him do the right thing and feed your parents. They just gave you all their assets. If that's the halacha that you have to feed them, as a sinner boy, he didn't have to force him. He didn't have to compel him and go to special means. And because he compelled them, the children to feed them, this man was so grateful and he kissed his feet. So it's mashma that the halacha is not that way. So in both cases, the halacha is not that you don't have to feed your kids from the age of 6 till 12, and you don't have to, if your parents gave you all their assets, you don't have to feed them. It's the right thing to do, but you don't have to feed them. Amar Rav Allah. Now, a third thing Rav Allah said, notice the first things he said was the name of Rish Lakish, the name of Yosef Chanina. The second thing he said was the name of Rish Lakish. The third thing that he said, the third takana that he said was just in the Rav Allah, just himself. Amar Rav Allah, a person who wants to give away to poor people, wants to give tzedakah, shouldn't give more than 20% of his assets. This Gemara, I think it's Basra, is used to talk about also when it comes to doing any mitzvah. For example, buying a lulav or buying tefillin, not to spend more than 20% of your assets. And what's the svara? You shouldn't give more than 20% of your assets. Because maybe if you give away too much, you yourself will have to come to be a beggar. So again, we're not talking here about meiser of meiser of that you're supposed to give meiser. Well, first of all, let's understand, tzedakah is giving money to poor people, right? You're not miyotz the mitzvah of kilo yechal evyon kilo what is the word? There will always be poor people. The mitzvah to give tzedakah to poor people is like we talked about Matanos Lanavim that we're makbid on Purim, Matanos Lanavim. You have to give to somebody who's really poor. It's very hard to find people who are so poor that they don't have 2 meals or 200 shekels or whatever it is. But that's real tzedakah, is giving money to poor people. Meiser is a separate thing. This meiser that we talk about, you give meiser, that's for tzedakah, it's for a shul, it's for a school, it's for a hospital, it's for any good cause, any good. So that's also called tzedakah, but that's not tzedakah laniyim. That's not matanos laniyim. Matanos laniyim is not 10% or 20%. Matanos laniyim is giving money to people who are really, really dirt poor. Then we have meiser, which is you're supposed to give 10%, at least 10%, or 20% if you can, of your assets. Not of your assets, of your income to good causes, like orphanages, shuls, schools, things of that sort, rabbis, Torah, kollel, whatever. You're supposed to give 20%. but not more than two, but that's as far as income. So of your income, you're mechuyev to give to poor people every year, really poor people, but doesn't say how much. Just as you have to give money to poor people, matanos levyona. Then there's meiser, which you have to give 10 or 20% of your income to good causes. Let's say, I'm just giving you the general idea. There's all kinds of shiur, and Rav Asher has a whole thing on this. And then we're talking about here about assets. You shouldn't give here. We're talking about giving more than 20% of your assets. Not talking about your normal income, your annual income that you give taxes on. So by the way, the stock itself is after taxes, right? After taxes. In other words, if you have to give 40% of your income, let's say a guy makes 100,000 shekels a year, and 40,000 goes to the government, so he has 60,000. That's when you start figuring out the percentages. The 10% is after taxes, right? Some say in Eretz Yisrael where a lot of your taxes go for social. That's also considered part stock, but that's already it's more complicated. In any case, here we're talking about giving 20% of your assets for a particular mitzvah, for a lulav, for tefillin, mezuzahs, whatever it is. You don't have to give more than 20. You shouldn't give more than 20%, lest you come to be poor and have to come on to the public funds also. So my Sbechad, there was a story with one guy, he wanted to spend liberally. This means they wanted to spend it liberally, to give away more than 20%. His friend didn't let him. Who was his friend? Rav Shapiro. Rav Shapiro didn't allow him to do it. Some says Rav Shapiro was the one who wanted to give more than 20%. So you're not supposed to do that. Rav Nachman, Yaakov, Micro, where do you see this in the pasuk? What's the source for it in the pasuk? Even though the ma'aser that we talked about is from income, and that's also based on this pasuk of Aser Asrenu, but here's a hint in the pasuk that you shouldn't give more than 20% because it says, Aser Asrenu. I will give 10% and another 10% lach. So the Gemara, the obvious question where it says, wait, the second meiser is not like the first meiser. Let's say you started with $100 that you have to give away, right? Let's say you have net income of $100, right? You give meiser, that's $10. Okay, what's the second meiser? $9 because you only have 90 left. So it's not the same. It's 19. It's a total of 19. Right. But the first one was 10% of the full amount. That's $10. The 10% of the remainder is only $9. So Amravashi Asrenu Lebasra Kikamud. It means since it doesn't say Aser, it doesn't say I will give meiser again. Middle of Aser Lecha Asrenu. I'll make the second one like the first one. It means that's like whatever the first meiser was, $10. I'm going to give it $10 again for a total of 20%. Amrav Shimi Barashi. Ushmuas Alol, these things that Rav Allah said that he heard from the Takanos of Usha, right? Mismatos Baholchos. They are, in case just to remember which one they were, whose name they said. As he said them, there were less names. And it was the first one we said was Rav Allah Amar Shlakesh Rav Kanina. The second was only Rav Allah in the name of Rish Lakish. The third one was Rav Allah himself. It goes less and less. And the simon to remember them and to remember the order and which one was said with more names and which one was less is Ktanim Kosvu Bizbazu. The young ones wrote and they spent it liberally. They wasted the money. Ktanim Kosvu Bizbazu. And why? Because the first member was about Ktanim, your young children up until the age of 12 is a mitzvah to feed them. The second was if a man Kosvu, if he wrote all his nechasim to his children, does the children have to support him? And Usha, they said you have to, but again, we didn't paskin that way. It's not a halacha that they could force him in court, but the rabbis encourage him to do it. And the third one is bizbazu, that you shouldn't spend more than 20% of your assets on more than one mitzvah. More takanos of Usha we'll see in Mitzvah tomorrow. Amar Yisik Usha Skino, the 15th line. We'll pick up here tomorrow. Mitzvah. Have a good day, everybody.